What's up? Um, yeah, what do I say? Whenever you start to stream, what do people usually say? I just feel like, I haven't like talked all day, right? And all of a sudden you have to start talking. And it's not bad if you're talking to somebody else. Um, like if you're at work or something, having a conversation, but just sitting here talking to yourself is always a little awkward. But my arms look really weird from this angle. Um, Today is Tuesday. I got a bunch of packages coming today. So I was watching somebody play uh, the Ace Attorney games, and I'm a big fan of the Ace Attorney games. So I bought the other two collections that I don't own yet, and they are being delivered today. So that will give me something to do when I'm laying in bed, about to go to sleep. I used to play a lot of video games, like on the Switch, because it was just nice to have it in laying in bed. And one of the games I played was the Ace Attorney trilogy game, which is like the first three games, like, that they were originally released on the DS, I think, and then they really re-released them on the Switch. And I think you can get them on Steam as well. Let me see. Yeah, they're available on Steam as well, so probably a lot cheaper too. Yeah, just the first game is like $10. That's pretty good. I think I paid like 30 for my copy. And I was thinking like, if I had a Windows computer, because most of these Steam games are built for Windows, it just makes more sense to buy like the games on like a digital, what do you call it, like release or something. You don't own the physical copy of the game, because then you're guaranteed that you'll have that game for whatever system that you're playing it on. Because it's linked to your Steam account. So if you can get Steam on your computer and you can run Windows, or if the game supports like Mac or Linux or something, or you have ways to run Windows stuff on these other platforms, then it just makes sense to buy it digitally. So I think moving forward, like, if I ever do get a Windows computer and it's pretty sufficient in terms of like graphics capability and stuff, I'll probably start buying digital copies of games. For one, they're cheaper, and two, they last a lot longer because, if my Switch breaks or something, right, I have to buy a whole new Switch. Those Switch games only work on Switch. So, I mean, if my computer breaks, I'll have to buy a new computer, but it's just like the portability of the things that you own seems a lot higher. You're not buying into like, you only can play this on a Nintendo machine. And maybe Nintendo comes out with a new console in the future that doesn't support Switch games. I don't think they're gonna be like, oh, you have a you have a physical copy of this? Well, here you go, have a digital copy. They're not gonna do that. I haven't looked into it. Maybe if you buy the physical copy, you can also get a digital version of it, which would be nice. But I'll have to research that and see if that's the case. Anyway, I bought the two Ace Attorney trilogy games I don't own. So I own like the first one that came out. This one is the one I own, and then I own the collection for the what's it called? It's like where it's set, and yeah, the Chronicles. I own these two, but I don't own the one that's centered on Miles Edgeworth. where he's like the main character. This one... Let's see, let's just bring up the whole thing. I want to play this game too eventually. It's by like... It's like written by the same dude that wrote the Ace Attorney games, Shu Takumi. So it's probably got a good story. But the Miles Edgeworth one and yeah, this one here, which you play as Miles Edgeworth, which is pretty sweet. And he's the prosecuting attorney, so I wonder how like different the gameplay is. I know that it's like got a you can like walk around in the game and stuff, which is kind of weird, but that'll be cool. And then this, I bought this one here, the Apollo trilogy, and I bought some other stuff, so I'm looking forward to those coming today. And then I bought a bunch of stuff for my car because well, I drive around a little like old Nissan truck that my grandpa gave me, and somehow I ran over those things that they put in the ground, like flag marker, I guess they're called. These things I ran over. Maker? I want marker. Like, you put them in the grass and they denote that there's like water line or a gas line or like a fiber optic line or things like that. Somebody threw one of those out into the street and I ran it over in such a way that it popped the tire. Well, it didn't like pop, it put a hole in the tire. And I could hear it when I was driving, because like when the tire would rotate around, that metal of the, it's like this little thing here that sticks out of the ground. It was stuck in the tire, and then you could hear it every time the tire would rotate. It would come into contact with the ground. It would make like this like kerplunk, kerplunk, kerplunk. And so I pulled off on the side of the road and I took a look at it, and it was like it was like stuck in the tire. So I yanked it out, and because I didn't have any tools, I would have just snipped it off and left it in there, at least until I got it, serviced or whatever. But the toolbox on the truck, it's got one of those like big toolboxes that sit on the like in the what do you call it? The bed of the truck against the cab, and there's some tools in there and there's some other stuff in there, but there's not any tools that I would have needed in that case. So what I ended up doing was I yanked it out, and then I listened for like a hissing sound. If you hear like hissing, that means like air is escaping because it's being shoved through like a really small little hole, and makes a little audio cue, I guess, that there's air coming out. So I listened for that. I didn't see anything, or hear anything, and I felt around the tire. I didn't feel any air coming out, so I was just like, well, maybe I could just drive it back home and check on it tomorrow morning and see if any air has come out of it. And then I did that, and then it still looked okay in the morning. And then when I drove to work, it felt fine. Everything seemed okay. And then when I took a look at it on my lunch break, the tire was totally flat. So I called up the tire shop and I was like, anyway, you guys can take care of this today, because I really need my car to get to work and stuff. And somebody at work had a tire inflator, the ones that you can plug into the cigarette lighter. And I aired up my tire and I drove it to the tire shop, and they were able to patch it for free. So if you ever get a little like puncture in your tire and it's something that can be easily patched, I think most tire shops or like automotive shops or whatever will do that as a free service, because it's such an easy fix from what I can tell. So that was nice. I was expecting to pay maybe like 20 or 30 bucks, but they were like, yeah, free service, you're good to go. And I was like, nice. So it didn't end up being too much of a hassle. The hard part was getting the truck down there. If I wasn't able to air up the tire, I don't know, I might have had it towed or something. I mean, you can drive. I think you can drive on a flat tire, but not. You don't want to drive on it if you can avoid it. Um, and it's probably about a 10 or 12-minute drive from work to the tire shop. So that's the other story I wanted to share, and a life lesson is, there's not many things in life that are free, but that's one of them. If you have a puncture in your tire and it's an easy fix, I guess tire shops will do it for free. I don't know if that's the standard or the norm, but I feel like it is. I feel like if I would have brought it somewhere else, there would have been a free service as well. But anyway, so after that happened, I'm like, man, I don't have anything for my car. If I get, the car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, or I need to change a tire or something in the middle of nowhere, I don't have any tools. So the other thing that's coming today, besides the Ace Attorney games, is some automotive equipment that I've been meaning to buy. So I don't think it'll come during stream, but if it does, I will go and enter the door and pause stream for a moment. But usually they come later in the day. I think we're one of like the last stops on the delivery route. At least it feels that way. So so today's stream, still working on the BVH stuff, and to be honest, I'm kind of tired of working on it. But what I want to finish on, like, I'm not too concerned with getting this thing to be on the GPU. I think for what I wanted to use it for, it doesn't need to be that like sophisticated, I guess. So I'll take a look at these two sections here and see what they consist of. Because I think, it says GPU, but I think it's more of a compute thing. So, GPUs originally made for graphics, but nowadays you can use them for anything that can be parallelized, or, So that'd be interesting. I do need practice in, like, doing the compute side of GPU stuff, but that's not the topic today. Today's topic is going to be about the surface area heuristic and this ordered traversal thing. So I can't really remember like where we left off last stream. It's been like a week, and I keep saying I'll stream on Thursdays, but I had that little car thing happen on Thursday, so I was kind of belayed with that. Is belay the right word? No, it's not. Beset? I don't know. You know what I mean. But maybe we'll just kind of break it down at a high level and then zone in on this at the moment. So the whole idea with this BVH thing is that we are trying to shoot a ray into the scene and see what we intersect with, and we're trying to do that as fast as possible, or at least in a smart way, so that we don't have to do all this extra work. The really dumb way is just check every mesh and every triangle of the mesh, like if you have multiple meshes in your scene, and see if you intersect with them. But you can imagine that you'd be checking a ton of triangles that you're not going to intersect with. So the whole idea around the BVH is that you put some order to the scene. Order being like, how do I word this? You are going to put bounds on the scene, and then you are going to kind of traverse this tree structure to get down to a localized little part of the scene that you're going to check the triangles of. And if you've ever looked at like spatial queries and stuff, this is pretty common. You know, the other common one is using like quad trees or oct trees, and I haven't really explored those at all. But the way that you would kind of utilize this, let's see if they got a picture. So these things are called primitives. Triangles can be primitives, or if you're not using like triangle soup kind of representation of your mesh or whatever, you know, whatever the lowest like primitive is of your scene or of your system or something. In our case, it's triangle. You know, you've put, I'm going to assume that people know a little bit about BVH, or maybe they've watched the previous streams. The whole idea is that you're putting triangles into these boxes, and those boxes are inside of boxes are inside of boxes, and then you hone in on those triangles from the very top. So you can imagine that if this is the box around two triangles, the probability of hitting one of these triangles is proportionate to the size of the triangle. If you're just shooting a random ray into the scene, the bigger the triangle is, the more likely you are to hit it. I think the audio is a little too loud. There. So there is a relationship between the size of the triangle and the probability of hitting that triangle, right? And that's kind of the heuristic, is that it's kind of worded nicely right here, the cost. So the cost that they're talking about is the cost of splitting up these nodes. So there's a recursive part of the algorithm which says, okay, we need to keep splitting up these nodes left and right until we reach some kind of stopping condition. And I think in our case, like a nice way that we can stop splitting is when we reach a cost that isn't going to be beneficial to us, meaning that splitting this node isn't really saving anything. It's actually going to cost more to run these queries if we keep on splitting. And you'll see that in the code as well. But the cost here is the cost of the split, and it's proportional to the sum cost of intersecting the two resulting boxes. So when you split your box, let's say that you have some mesh out here, and we're going to use like a sphere mesh or whatever. Let's just say it's in 2D. It'll put a box around that, and now we want to split because this thing has triangles in it, and we don't want to check every triangle. You know, maybe it's like that. We want to say if we shoot a ray and it hits like right here or something, we don't need to check all of these triangles on the left side. 1 second. Okay, so you're going to split this node, this bounding box, which I'm going to call a node, to a left and a right. And then you're going to calculate the cost of that split. But where do you put that split is what we're determining, because, you know, this is a pretty symmetrical mesh, but you might have meshes that have a lot of weird triangles or whatever. And then, you know, you could split it multiple different ways here or whatever along the bounding box. So you're taking a look at like what's the best split, and the way that you find that is you calculate, you know, the cost of that split on the left side and the right side, and then you say, well, that has a total cost of whatever, and then what you're trying to do is minimize the cost. So maybe it's like this split, but then you calculate this one and find that it's a lower cost. Well, now we want to split right here. Or sorry, it's kind of like this is the split, and this is the split, and this is the split. we're going to run through these splits and say, okay, I found the one that generates the, or gives like the lowest cost, and I'm going to go with that split. And this is kind of like the algorithm or the equation that tells you the cost of it. And so we're trying to minimize what this is. So we'll have a bunch of candidate splits, and then we're just trying to find the one with the lowest cost, and that's the one that's going to tell us how we're going to split the node or the bounding box into two parts. Now, you can do this a bunch of different ways, but they're going to introduce this bend split. Where is it? Might be in the next section. Yeah, right here, bend BVH. So in this article, like, they start out by looking at all the midpoints of every triangle and using that as a candidate split point. You can imagine that that is not very efficient because you're looking at all the midpoints, and the midpoint is three parts, X, Y, Z. So you're looking at per triangle, per axis of each midpoint of every triangle. And you're also above that loop, like you're looping over every triangle to determine if it belongs on the left side of that midpoint, whatever midpoint you found, whatever midpoint was the best cost, the midpoint you're using as a split. So you're doing like an O of n squared kind of algorithm. You do have to loop over the triangles at some point, but the inner loop, you can use that surface area heuristic, and you can just bin being a verb, you can bin your splits in such a way that this can be like the cost of doing all this in terms of like performance can be greatly reduced. So that's one part that we'll focus on today. And then the next part is the ordered traversal, which comes into play when you're talking about intersections. And the algorithm is here. Actually, I don't think he summarizes the algorithm, but the idea here is that sometimes when you shoot a ray through the structure that you create, your BVH, different views of the BVH, so this is used in ray tracing a lot, but we're using it for intersection calculation. But sometimes when you shoot the ray through, depending on the orientation of the BVH, you might get faster calculation or slower calculation, and you want to kind of consolidate that to kind of give you like the best, because you want this thing to finish quickly. You want your ray to go through the object really quickly and report the intersections, and the way that you would tweak that is in how you're traversing the tree. So you've created the tree, and now you're just shooting a ray through the BVH, and you want that to be fast. Well, you have to rearrange how you're doing the logic in the intersection function. And there's a way to do that. I don't know if it's like the most optimized way, but you can be a lot more thoughtful about how you're traversing the tree. And all the details and stuff are kind of in this article. But it utilizes, like before, I think last stream we were doing just kind of like the naive approach where we just would do, it was either a depth first search or a breadth first search or something like that. But we would do it in a recursive manner. We're going to refactor that to use a stack. And it's actually not too difficult, and I think we'll start out with this because at the moment I took away all the code. You can see like as I mouse over this, or like the pointer goes over the mesh, we should be seeing a highlight over the triangle that is being intersected. But we don't, and the reason is that I just totally removed all of the code for that. here. So here's our intersect function, which is being called on mouse move in the component here. So it's being called here, and it's supposed to return a list of intersections, and then we're just setting a line geometry to kind of like match whatever triangle it ends up being. We're just kind of setting the points of the line geometry so that it is kind of like overlaid on top of that triangle. So I think we'll start here because it will be nice to, I guess will be our test, and this will also be our test for when we do the surface area heuristic stuff. This show bounds toggle, it will show like how many nodes we have. At the lowest level, it'll show all the leaf nodes. And because this is a symmetrical mesh, we should see, like, it'll be very easy to test if the bounds are correct. And the way that we test the intersection is that, you know, wherever the mouse is, one of the triangle underneath the cursor will be a white color. I think the default color for a line material is white. But I think doing this first, we'll be able to test much more easily if, you know, the code is working properly and all that. So let's start there with the intersection. And I've got the code on the other monitor because this is pretty complex stuff, and I can tell because it's usually hard to explain it. Which has me thinking about like why white papers are so difficult to read and understand. It's because like you have to be kind of very aware of like whatever topic that the white paper is, you know, about. And then again, like you're also trying to squeeze in a lot of information into like, you know, 10 or 11 pages, right? You kind of have to cut corners, I think. So I'm trying to give a little bit of grace to people that, you know, the academic papers and stuff. There's a line between like, you know, I don't want to like show everything from the very beginning. Here's what a BVH is. Here's how to construct it. Here's the whole journey. I'm going to just assume that you're reading this paper because you want to know, or maybe you at least know a little bit about the BVH in this case. I don't know. I just feel like those white papers, those academic papers, were easier to comprehend. And there might be like, you know, an audience maybe, or a desire or need or something for, you know, white papers or whatever. Why don't we put them on websites? Why don't we have interactive stuff? Why don't we say, instead of, you know, doing like an academic paper or whatever, you do an academic visualization or, you know, some kind of web page or something to present the information that you're trying to present, right? That's more work, but I think that would be a lot more helpful for people that, you know, want to learn this stuff. Yeah, I hope that there's a shift in that kind of like, I don't know, how we generate that kind of information and how we consume it and stuff. But anyway, so I've got the working code on the other monitor, and we're just gonna walk through it. So in the end of this function, this intersections, it will hold all of the intersections of this mesh, and in our case, there should be only two. I haven't tested it, but you can imagine like it'll be the triangle that you intersect with when you enter the sphere, and then the triangle that you intersect with when you exit the sphere. And if you had a mesh that, you know, was something like this, and you shot a ray like this or something, you'd have four intersections, one here, one here, one here, and one here. But I'll just get this working and then we'll take a look at the intersections array that, gets populated. So in that article, they use like a stack approach. We're going to do the same thing, but ours will be a little bit different. Let me go over here. So this stack holds references to nodes, which are just numbers, right? A pointer is just a number to some place in memory. We're actually going to use the node index because we have this nodes array. So we can always get the node based on the node index. So there's no need to push a node into a stack, or, we don't need to do like this. We can just leave this be a number, and it'll be the index. So it'll hold like the indices of all these nodes. So let's make our stack, and the first thing in the stack is the node index. 0 is always the root node. So in our case, it's this big box that holds the entire mesh, all the triangles of the mesh. So that'll be the first thing we put in the stack, and then we'll enter our while loop. So while the stack is not empty, then we need to do things with stuff in the stack. We'll get the first item off the stack, and that's going to be stack.pop. Now pop could return undefined, and that's the case where there's nothing in the array, there's nothing to pop out of the array. That's where it returns undefined. But checking the length here, you know that there will be stuff in the stack, or in the array, right? So we know that this shouldn't fail or return undefined. It shouldn't return undefined because we checked the length of the stack here. And there's never like, there's never a time we're adding into the stack like asynchronously, right? That would be very weird, but imagine like the code said, okay, I'm going to process some other, coroutine or whatever, and now the stack has nothing in it, between like here and here. We don't have to worry about that. But you can imagine like you could put this here, and now the type of this is number. You know that this will always return a number. But equally, you could just do this. We'll say if it's undefined. I don't like using undefined, so we'll just default it to null. If it is null, then we can just return. Or no, we'll break out of the loop. So now the node index should be a number. And now we need to get the node. So that's going to be node. We have the nodes coming in through here. And this BVH node is just an extension of box 3, which has a min and a max. It's the left bottom corner of the box. Imagine this is the minimum, this is XYZ, and then the maximum over here. So the box is really just a bounding box, or a AABB box. An access the line bounding box. Where's my... Yeah, here. So, here's our box. Let me draw it better. Like this. Here, let's say this is the bottom left corner. A lot of bottom left back corner. That has an XYZ. And then this is the top right front corner. That's also an XYZ. And then, let's say this is min, max. The min x is always less than the max x, and that's the same for the y and the z. So if we give these subscripts like 0, 1, 2, or 0, 0, 0, let's say, this isn't like the best way to represent these or name these, I guess, but x0 will always be less than x1, and then the same thing for y0, y1. and z0 is less than that. So that's what a box 3 is. And then a bin just has, it is a box 3 with, how many triangles are inside of that box. And a BBH node is a node in the tree, which is a bin, and it has a pointer just really being array index into either the nodes array or the triangles array. And if the node is a leaf node, this will be the starting position of the first triangle in the array. If it's not, it will be the index of the left child. So you can interpret this two ways depending on if you're a leaf node or if you're not a leaf node. So the node here, we can access nodes at the node index. That'll give us our node that we're considering. And then if the triangle count of that node is greater than 0, that means that it is not a leaf node. Or sorry, if it is greater than 0, so this is after all the splitting has happened, the internal nodes of the tree should have no triangles. So if you had a mesh like this, you'd have at the very top, your bounding box around that mesh, and it would actually be like this. Where's the color? Like this. And then this would get split. Pretend that there's more triangles here that can actually draw them. Color white. Let's do like this. And then you have maybe triangles like this. Something like that, right? This will get split and you'll have, maybe you get split like this. Something like that. And here you have the top 4 triangles. And then, this is the bottom right here, and then this is the bottom 4 triangles. And you keep splitting until you say, okay, there's enough. I don't want to split anymore. Let's say this was our stopping split. This is a leaf node because it has no children. And this is a leaf node because it has no children. This is an internal node. But it doesn't, every time you split it, it no longer holds these triangle information. So this guy's, after the split happens, this guy's triangle count is 0. So we know here that it is a leaf node if it has triangles inside of it. This one has triangle count 4, this one has triangle count 4. And before the split happens, this thing had a triangle count of 8. If we bring back the triangles, got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So after the split, these two should always add up to the number of triangles before the split. But after the split, this guy has no triangles in it. And it's left first. We'll point to this left child here. It'll be the index of the left child. Right, so here, the triangle count, if it is greater than 0, then we know it's a leaf node. That's our condition for checking all the triangles in that node for intersection. Otherwise, that's where we need to think about how we're going to push stuff into the stack. But we'll do that after this branch here. So we need to loop over the triangles. Actually, we can do it like this. Yeah, I is less than count, I plus equals 1. So that's our loop over the triangles. this should be lowercase. So this is an offset. We already said that the position of the first triangle is at left first. And then we're going to add an offset. So the triangle count here, this is where do you start? And then this is how many triangles do you have? So if, you know, these triangles are laid out linearly in memory. So let's say that they're laid out like this. I guess we've got this many more. And it wouldn't be like this because there's, you know, these are actually kind of like this. You know, or whatever, right? But, you know, let's say we're looking at this one here. This one's left first would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's got 4 triangles in it. So you go 5, 6, 7, 8. So here, you know, this would be 5, and then we're adding to it 1, 2, 3, 4. Or actually, it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Because we now go above count. So the indices here would be from, you know, if the left first is 5, then we're looking at these triangle indices. But the way that we get these positions, this is going to be an indexed geometry. And in that geometry, I kind of went over this in a lot of detail last stream, but you know, for a mesh like this, so we got 2 triangles, you can draw this. Let's say that it's indexed like this. The index buffer attribute will tell you that to draw the first triangle, you look at 0, 1, 2. And to draw the next triangle, you can reuse some of the geometry, like position information. To draw the next triangle, let's say it's 1, 2, 3. So these come in pairs, or I guess these come in triplets. So this one starts at 0. You know, these are inside of an array somewhere. And you can actually log out that information if you want. But you know, this is in some buffer attribute, in some typed array. So it's really just laid out like this. This is what's in the array, and this is, you know, position 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and so on. So this triangle starts at position 0. This triangle starts at position 3. So the offset is 3 because each of these refers to like a vertex of the triangle. This is vertex 0, vertex 1, vertex 2, and so on. So they come in triplets. So you need to multiply by 3 to get to the first position of the, you know, to get to the position of the first index of the triangle. So that's the index, and then we have these positions here, or like these are dummy variables for those triangle vertices. We need to put those into those vectors. So you do a dot from buffer attribute, and it'll be the position attribute right here. And then the index, that's going to be, this is an index into the index attribute. So you do index attribute dot get x at the index. That says, you know, get out this number, we're going to get 1 out here, and then use that as an index into the position attribute. So these are laid out like this. You know, I don't know if this is 100% accurate. You know, it might be like, it might be flipped like this or something. But each of these in the position attribute each like point here is 3 vectors, an x, y, and a z. So that goes for that guy, and then you have another x, y, z. And then that set goes for this guy, and so on. So every triangle will have 9 items in the position attribute. It'll be, you know, the first vertex, say v0, and then it'll be the next v1, and then, you know, to form a triangle, you've got v2. And that's, you know, after this one here. But we got an index out here, and that says, you know, start at, what did we get out? Start at position 1, and then grab position 2, and then grab position 3. So these look like they're ordered, but these could be out of order or something, right? We're just reusing information that's in that position attribute. So that gets us the first index, or sorry, the first vertex of the triangle. And then we need to get the next one. This is really easy. You just get the Y, get the Z. And now A, B, and C hold the vertex information for that triangle that we're currently looking at. Remember, we're in a loop here, looking at every triangle. A triangle is just 3 positions, but those positions are in 3D space. So every point or every position is an X, Y, Z. So you've actually got 3 X's, 3 Y's, and 3 Z's. But we could take the ray, and we're passing in the ray at the top here. You take the ray, and we can ask if we intersected with this triangle. If the ray.intersect triangle. And you can tell there by the signature, it takes A, B, and C. So we can just put those in there. And then this backface culling, we'll say it's true. I haven't really figured out what that is, but I have an idea. I just haven't played with it. And then we need a place to put this. We'll put it in the dummy vector. So this could return null. That means that it did not intersect that triangle. We can check for that. If the intersection is null, we'll just continue through the loop. If it is not null, then we need to push that triangle into the intersections array right here. But rather than just pushing the 3 vertices, we can give a little bit more information. This intersections type right here has a triangle, and it has the point of intersection, and then the distance squared. That's the square square distance from the ray's origin to the point of intersection. So we can compute all that for the caller of this function. So we'll do const distance squared. Take the dummy vector. Remember, we put in the point of intersection to the dummy vector here. Take the dummy vector, and we'll calculate the distance, squared distance to the ray's origin. And then here's what we'll actually push into the intersections. Push in the distance squared. The point is the dummy vector, but we want to copy it. We don't want to push in a reference. We want to actually clone this, because that dummy vector is used like everywhere in the code, and it's just like a scratch vector. So if we return a reference to this thing, anytime that the dummy vector updates, you know, this information is no longer like valid. So that's why we have to make a clone of it. You can also do you do like new vector3 dot copy the dummy vector. That would be the same thing. It's more to write, however, like it's longer This is much longer than the dot clone. But it's the same thing. You're copying the dummy vector's components into the new vector. The cloning just makes a copy of it as well. So we'll do dot clone. It's a little bit shorter. Then let me see. Maybe find some more music. Let's see. Is this the one we looked at? No. Yeah, so the other thing we need to put in here is the triangles. So we can do new t.triangle. And I'm sending along the triangle because out here, you'll get a triangle out right here. And this triangle has this equals property, which is really nice. And I guess that might be it. Checking if two triangles are the same, we're probably just looking at the vertices of each. But I might refactor that to get rid of the triangle, because it is another like allocation. But today we're just gonna stick with the triangle. And then the triangle's points, is A, but we have to clone it. So we're cloning these for the same reason that we're cloning the dummy vector from before. And then there we go. That handles, intersecting with all of the triangles of that leaf node. Otherwise, if we had, let's see, this corresponds to this branch. So this is the case where the node is an internal node, internal to the tree. So in this case, we can get its two children. We're going to get the distance from the array's origin to the bounding boxes of each child. And then we'll take a look at and see which child is closer based on the distance. And we're going to push into the stack whatever is the closest. Like, we want to do this in a thoughtful way, so the stack is like this. It's got some stuff in it maybe. But we're going to find the left, like the distance to the left child and the distance to the right child. And what we want to do is handle the left child first. So what that means is we need to push in the right child and then the left child, because at the top of this loop, we always pop off the last element in the array. And we want to process the left child first. That way, there's optimizations to be made. Like, if you just wanted the first intersection, whatever is closer, let's say we intersected with both, or we're going to check the closer box first, because if you wanted the closest intersection, everything in the closer box will be closer than everything in the right box. So let's say, you had two boxes like this, and you shot a ray through the mesh. Your mesh is right here. This is the closer box. There's no way that anything in here could be closer than anything in here. And if I wanted just the first intersection right here, I could stop. Whenever I went here, I could just exit this entire function or whatever. So you want to process the closer box first, which means that the the left box is first, then that goes into the array last. because stack, right, is a whoever is the first in, or sorry, whoever is the last in is the first out. So let's get the two distances. And we can just check the box here, because the distance to the box will always be, let's see, it will always be at least, like whatever triangle we intersect with inside of this box, it will always be at least, is it at least, do I want to say at least? You know, if you imagine if you had triangles inside this box or whatever, you intersected with a triangle that was like right on the edge of the box, right? That's the closest triangle. There's no way that you can intersect with something that is like outside of this box. So the distance to the box is always going to be less than or equal to the distance to the closest triangle. I guess it's greater than. If you only had one triangle in this box and it like, you know, intersected here or something. Yeah, okay, so that's a greater distance to here. So the distance to the box is always going to be less than or equal to the distance to the first triangle that you intersect with. I think I'm saying that right. So we check for intersection with the box. We get the left child that's at the left index. I don't have the left index yet, but let's get that. The left index. So if we are in this loop, we know that we are a internal node, and that's just node dot left first. And then the right child index is that plus 1. Or you could just do left index plus 1. And then that's the left index, so we do that, and we put the intersection into the dummy vector. This could return null if it did not intersect the box. And in that case, we want to consider that to be, like if we didn't intersect with the box, then we want that distance to be infinity. It is as far away as possible. We want this to return a number. You can see there it's number or vector 3. This, we need to check if we did intersect, then what we want to do is calculate the distance squared to the ray's origin. Now it returns a number, which makes sense. It's just you know, along that ray, it's going to be some, you know, scalar value along that ray. And distances, right, are always like one-dimensional, like, right? The distance function, like the distance is defined as square root of like x squared plus y squared plus z squared, right? This is a number, this is a number, and this is a number, or this is z squared. So it makes sense that you're getting out just a scalar value. And this returns a scalar value too, so that makes sense. So that's the distance to the left box. Let's get the distance to the right box. That's going to be the same thing, but we're looking at the right index. And now, remember that we wanted to push in whatever child was closer. We wanted that to go into the stack last. So we need to figure out which of these is closer than the other. So we'll just assume that the left is closer, but if it's not, then we'll rearrange stuff so that the right is in the right child stuff is in the correct variables. So we need a closer index, and it'll default to the left side. We'll need a closer distance. That'll be the left distance. And then we'll need further index. That's defaults to the right side. And a further distance. That's the right distance. So we're assuming here that the left is closer, but now we need to check that that's true. So we'll say if the right distance, I guess we could do left distance. Well, no, let's do right distance. If right distance is less than the left distance, then that means that the right side, the right box, is closer. And we need to flip these things around. So if that's the case, then we'll just flip the closer with the further. So let's do temp, we'll set that to the closer index. We'll do closer index equals further index, and then further index equals the temp. So that flips the, that's like a, a standard swap, swapping the closer index with the further index. And then we need to do the same thing for the distances. So we can just copy this. Actually, we can just replace index with distance. So that does the swap, and then now we need to, the final thing we do is we push these indices into the stack. So we check the closer distance. If that's less than infinity, which means that we intersected the box, we intersected with the closer one. Then we need to push in the further distance, or further index, but only if we intersected with it. So we're testing for intersection. If this is, less than infinity, that means we intersected. So we'll do stack dot push further index. And then the last thing we do is we push in the closer index. And that's it. So here we're checking, if the closer index or the closer distance is less than infinity, that means we intersected with that box. But we don't want to push in that box immediately. We don't want to do this. We want to check that we intersected with the further box before we do that, because we want to put further one in first, and then we want to put the closer one in. So that's that. And that's the entire stack-based ordered traversal kind of thing that is talked about in this section. So it's a reinterpretation of this. And to check that it works, we only have one box here. So whenever we go over this guy, it's not working. But we should be intersecting, we're checking every triangle in that bounds. I mean, it kind of looks like it's working, except for down here. So when this happens and I don't know what we missed, I usually just copy the function over. Because usually it's some line somewhere that I missed. But yeah, every time, it just highlights whatever triangle we are hovering over. But we have only one box. So we're checking every single triangle in this box. But we don't want to do that. We want to break this box down into, sections so that we can skip over checking triangles that we know we're not going to intersect with. So how we do that is we be thoughtful about how we're splitting up this uh, nodes array. So if you take a look here, you can see that there is no splitting happening. And the root node is a child node. And the way that you tell that is because it has a triangle count. If it's an internal node, the triangle count will be 0. But we need to split up this thing so that we get more boxes. So let's do that. On my own time, it's been about an hour. Yeah, I think we can get this done in an hour. So we're gonna keep track of a lot of stuff. I think my shirt is too small. Might be time to get some new shirts. It's definitely faded. This shirt used to be a lot more like colorful, but that's what happens. I think I kind of want to take a little break. I've been trying to like remember to take breaks during stream. So that's part 1. That's doing the order traversal. In the next part, when we get back, we'll do this split function here. Well, yeah, the split function, and in this create function, we're going to do a lot of pre-computation because we'll refer to a lot of these values in the split function. The split function is at the top here. So take a little break, maybe about a couple minutes, and then we'll get started on that. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. All right, where are we? So let's go over the things that we'll need to pre-compute. So a lot of this like surface area heuristic stuff and the splitting up the bounds and all this is based on centroids. The centroid is just like the midpoint of the triangle. So each of these triangles has a midpoint, like this guy, for example, might be like right here. And it's just a simple calculation. You just take every vertex to find the x position of the centroid. You just add up. It's the midpoint formula. You just add up the x's, divide by 3. 3 because there's 3 values you're looking at, right? Just the average of the x's, and the average of the y's, and the average of the z's. But we'll need those. And that's going to be, one centroid per triangle. So let's get those. And the way that I'm going to store this is in a float32 array. And the way that it'll be laid out, maybe I'll show that first. So the centroid has an x, y, and z. And there are three floats. This is a float32 array, or it will be. So 3 floats per triangle. So it's kind of the same way that the position, it's the same way that the position data is laid out. Let's say you have 3 vertices per triangle. Here you're gonna have 1 vertex per triangle, but it's an x, y, z. And it's the midpoint of the triangle. So we'll do new float32 array. The length, like how many of these do we have? We have 3 floats per triangle, like it said here. So it's 3 times the triangle count. That'll be our centroids. But now we need to populate this thing. Populate meaning like, it's already got values in there. Maybe populate's not the right word, but we need to set everything that's in there. We need to set them to the right values. So we're going to loop over the triangles and calculate each one's centroid and put that into the centroid array. This thing's already, I think it like defaults to being filled with zeros. But it needs to hold the correct information. So yeah, this is full of zeros at the moment, but we can fill it with the, not fill it, I mean like we'll set the correct values. So we'll loop over the triangles. That's going to be this. We can actually do triangle count here. Okay, now to get the triangle index, that's going to be 3 times I. 3 because every, like this is the starting index. So this has x0, y0, z0. That's hard to say. Z0. I hate that. And x1, y1, z1, and so on. So each of these, has offset of 3, so we multiply the I by 3. That's the triangle index. Now we need to get the actual position information. So that's the index into the indices. Do we have indices? Yeah, we do. Right here. So we want to get the, let me draw this. Like, let's say that here's our triangle, and this is, A, B, and C. Actually, let's call this like v, just so that it's just in line with the notes. V0, V1, V2, V for vertex. We want to get the X, Y, Z of each of these because we'll take the X's, we'll add them up. You know, we need to calculate the average of the X's, the Y's, and the Z's. Dang, I keep doing Y, Z1. And X2, Y2, Z2. And we know that the midpoint, or, you know, the centroid at this position is the average of the X's for this triangle, and so on. So we need to get each of these, and I guess we'll just put them into their own variables, and then we'll do the midpoints from there. So, but we need to pull this from the position attribute, and remember this is assuming that this is a index geometry, so we can't just get into the position attribute. We have to calculate the indices of each triangle from the index attribute. So indices here comes from here. It's indices at the triangle index. But this needs to be multiplied by 3. I can't remember why. Because we are already multiplying this by 3. But I think this is because... let me think about that. Yeah, I have to think about why that's the case. I don't want to think about it too hard, so I'm just gonna go with it. It's a way to get to, you know, this is an actual array in this case. It's not the buffer attribute. So I think if we did have a buffer attribute and we're doing the get X, get Y, and get Z, I know that that will multiply by the item size. But the item size of an index attribute is 0. Or sorry, is 1. So I'm not sure. But we'll just roll with it. So we get, you know, the index of each point of the triangle, each corner. We need to get the V0x. That's going to be positions at I0. V0y is positions at I0 plus 1. And these will all be kind of similar. This is 2. And then this is 1, 1, 1. And then last thing is the third vertex. Okay, now we have each, and we can calculate the centroids. We'll do centroids at the triangle index. You know, that's the starting, that's the X. That's the starting position in the array. You take every X, you add them up. Divide by 3, and then same thing for the Y's. Okay, and then same thing for the Z's. Oops. Yeah. So now centroids holds the centroid information. So that's one of the things we'll need, and then we'll need the bounds of each triangle as well. So the bounds is going to be 6 values per triangle. And, you know, it's going to be Where's that box that we drew? Do I still have it? Yeah. So it's 6 values. The bounds in this case indicates the bounding box of the triangle. This triangle is in 3 dimensions, so it will have a z component as well. But it's the min and the max. So it's 6 values, 6 floats per triangle. So the bounds is a new float 32 array, and that's going to be 3 times 2 times triangle count. 2 because we have a min and a max, and in those, the min has XYZ and the max has XYZ. So that's the bounds. And then the bounds index, this is really simple. The index, so here the index into the centroids, because it was 3 values per triangle. That's the same with the indices. So this and this are kind of the index in the same way. You can just reuse the triangle index. But here we need to get the bounds index, and that's the triangle index times 2, right? So the difference between these two, and the difference is you're multiplying by 2 right here. Okay, and then bounds at the bounds index, that's going to be the minimum x. So this is laid out like this. Min x, min y, min z, max x, max y, max z. So that's 6. Yeah, it's 2 vectors, 2 vector 3s per triangle. So 6 floats per triangle. Or, this is 3 times 2. So if we don't add any offset here, that'll be the min x. That's going to be math.min of the x's. And then the min y, you just add 1 to this, that gets us to here. It's going to be same thing, but for the y's. And then, same thing for the z's. And then now we need to do the maxes, so we just 3, 4, and 5. We replace these with max. And I think that's right, yeah. So that's the bounds calculation, and then that's the bounding box of each triangle. So the reason why we're doing all this is we're going to use these, or pass these along to the split function, and that's where they'll get used. And you'll see how they get used from there. And before I forget, we need to take the root. So the root is this big thing here. Let's see if it... Yeah, this yellow box here, we need to take the root and we need to set its min and max, or its bounding box, right? It doesn't have its bounding box set yet. So you can expand by point. That's going to be dummy vector is a point, so we can reuse that. From the array, we could set from some array. We take the bounds and the bounds index. So what's that? The bounds. The bounds index is calculated. Oh, yeah. This needs to be inside of the loop. So we can set the roots bounds, and we don't need to set its centroid. It doesn't have a centroid because it's not a triangle, but the root, extends from box 3. If we look here, so it will have a min and a max, and we can set that. We can keep expanding that as we loop over the triangles. So it might help. Maybe I'll make a visualization for this, but in the beginning it's empty, and every triangle that we look at, we're gonna expand the box to contain that triangle. So it'll keep expanding as we loop over these triangles. Maybe it won't expand because it already contains the triangle. That could be a thing. But expand by point always expands if it needs to. Expand the box to include the triangle if necessary. And it is necessary. So that's going to expand by the min, and then we need to expand by the max as well. So we can do that. Take the dummy vector, we'll set it from the bounds array. But here to get the max, it's, +3 here because we need to skip over the mins. So the mins are min x, min y, min z. We'd skip over that. There's 3 of them. We just add 3 to the index. Yep, and then if we take a look at the root, let's log out the root. Can you see that? I'm over that, so let me pull it out a little bit. This sphere, it goes from -1 to 1 in every dimension. So box here, and you can see that. The box has a size of 2, I guess. So the radius of the sphere is 1, and then the box is double that. So these numbers here make sense. Okay, and then we need to call the split. So after we set up everything, now we need to split, and we pass in the root, the nodes, the indices, centroids, bounds, and that's it. So we're split up here. This is how we're going to be splitting the node. Let me find that function on the other screen. And then this is the same thing. We're going to keep track of a lot of data at the top. This will be the hardest one to explain, but I will try. This is the biggest function out of everything. This thing is like 200 lines. So I guess we'll just start at the top. So we're going to keep track of, and in the interest of time, I'm going to just copy and paste this. So here's what we're going to keep track of. The best axis index, which is going to be 0, 1, or 2. 0 for x. This is determining how we're going to split up this box, and we have a ton of different ways we could do this. But we're going to consider along the x-axis, along the y, and along the z-axis. So we're going to use that. We're going to use the best split position. This is a number. So this says along that axis, where is the best place to split? And that's based on the cost. So min cost will determine both of these values. And then the best min and the best difference between the bounds, that is going to be used for indexing into these bins, which we haven't made yet. But binning these things means that we're going to put these into separate containers, and then we can just look at the containers rather than actually looking at the it's kind of like quantizing the midpoints. You can think of it like that. So we'll need to keep track of these, and you'll see like keeping track of these is so that they can be used outside of the loops that we're going to make. And these will help us determine like we need to put this triangle into the left side or the left triangle, or we need to put it into the right triangle. Or sorry, we need to put the triangle that we're currently looking at into the left child or into the right child based on all these things that we're keeping track of. And then we're going to keep the boxes. So this is kind of like keeping track of the bounds that we're building. Each bin kind of builds a bound around that bin. So we'll need that as well. We're going to default the bin count to 8. And we're going to pre-calculate the... so the way that this is being split up, if you want to split a region like this into 8 bins, you've got... you make 7 splits. So it's the bin count minus 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Now you've got 8 sections. So we'll need that as well. We're going to set that to a variable. And then we'll make our bins. So I coded this up and then I had the AI kind of tweak it. And it put a lot of this stuff outside of the loops because you could reuse this. So it's just kind of like pushing bins into this bin array. And remember what a bin is. It's really just a box with a triangle count. Keeping track of how many triangles are inside of that bin. So that populates the bins. You could also do it like this. Length is bin count. And then make a new bin. Maybe that's a little bit cleaner, but it's the same thing. Okay, so we got our bins going, and then we need to keep track of the left counts and the left half areas. So what are those? So every bin has a left count. So rather than the bin like keeping track of so this is how we're splitting, right? The left count isn't the count of triangles in the bin. It already keeps track of its triangle count. But it's like the total amount of triangle, like the triangle counts. I don't know how I put this. I knew this was going to be hard to explain, but this is another like bookkeeping thing. And the counts here will be used when we calculate the surface area cost, the SAH cost. So it's another thing that we need to keep track of to do that, because we're calculating the cost of the split. So this will be maybe a little bit more apparent when we actually get to that part of the code. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to loop over every axis, the 0, 1, 2, and we're going to loop over all the triangles. So we're going to do a double loop. One over the axes and then one over the triangles. So what that looks like is this. So for 0, 1, 2, we're going to set some bounds mins. We're going to calculate the min and max of the this is kind of interesting. Maybe we'll look at the picture to demonstrate what this is doing. And the picture's in 2D, so that'll be a little bit simpler. But it's in the binned, like the third part, or yeah, the third part of this article. But we're creating this here. So these are our splits, and then these are our bins, I guess. And we're doing all this because we want to bin these things, and it'll be a lot faster to refer to their bins rather than their actual, calculating. Well, no, that's not true. I gotta think about this one. I knew this was gonna be difficult to explain. But it is kind of talked about in the article. But this is calculating like the bounds, min and max, for every, like we're looping over the triangles. We're getting a look at their centroids, and we're keeping the minimum x and the maximum x. The minimum, if we're at the first, like if I is 0 here, the index is 0, we're looking at the x's, we're getting the max centroid x and the max, yeah, okay. So the max centroid x here is this guy, and the minimum is this guy over here. So we can look at those rather than looking at the, they're using circles here, but, imagine we're using triangles. We can get a tighter bounds if we look at the centroids. So that's the x, and the same thing for the y. This yellow box goes over the centroids rather than the actual like geometry itself. So we can get a tighter bounds, and that's because when we do all these comparisons, we're looking at the centroid, not the the x, y, and z of the points of the triangle. So this is all in an attempt to get a really good split, to minimize the cost of everything. So the cost is going to be smaller if we can get a tighter bounds, or it should be smaller, right? Because the triangle will be put into a bin or whatever that is closer to its actual centroid. So the way that you calculate this, when we put this triangle into one of the bins, it's going to be kind of like a linear interpolation kind of thing. But we're going to calculate the bounds difference, and we're going to divide the bin count by that. Bin count is 8. But, to avoid a division by 0, we need to make sure that the bounds actually has dimension to it. If these two are equal, then nothing can be put into that bound. I guess you can kind of interpret it that way. So the bounds difference must be greater than 0, and that's true because if they are equal, then there's nothing that box, has like a volume of 0. You can't put anything in that box. If it's not, then it has dimension to it. So what we'll check is if the bounds, like if the min and the max are equal, then we can just continue. We can stop right there and go to the next iteration of the loop, because there's nothing more to do. We can't split along this, like whatever we created, whatever bounds we created or whatever with these centroids, we can't do anything with the current bounds that we've calculated, like the min and max here. So we'll just continue. Otherwise, we can start binning things. But we need to make the bins, because we're reusing bins here. We need to make sure that we clear out the bins and set their triangle counts back to 0. So before we do this loop where we bin things, we need to like reset all the data that we're working with. So we'll take for every bin, we'll just reset things. We'll reset the bins. So I guess we could actually do it like this. For of bins, we'll do bin dot make empty, and then we'll do bin dot triangle count is 0. Okay. Now let's get the bounds difference. That's just the difference between, that's just kind of like the size of the bounds. I think you could also do, well, bounds here are just scalars, but box 3 has a size property as well. Like if we take this and we get size, we could put this into a size variable. Yeah, but the bounds here are just scalar values, so we can just take their difference. The size there will take, the x size, the y size, and the z size. But we know that we're only ever looking at one dimension because we're kind of looping over the axes here. So that's that's bounds max minus bounds min. And then we'll take, this will be what we multiply by. But, let me just copy it and then I'll explain it. So this scale here, it's being used right here. And, let's say that scale is 1. This is actually, you kind of rewrite this as count, and this thing divided by the bounds diff. So this is where the linear interpolation comes into play. This is like, the centroid, let's call it C, minus the min, all on top of max, minus min. So that goes from 1 to 0, but we need this to be an index into the bins array. So in order to calculate this, I think I've done this on stream before, but we know that C should lie in between these values here, but C could also be the max bound, in which case, it might be like this or this. C could be one of these here, but we won't worry about that at the moment. We'll just assume that it's going to be in between these values, but we want these to go from 0 to 1, and then we're going to scale them up so that they are an index into the bins array. So the way that you do that is you subtract the min from everything. This will go to 0, min minus min. This will be C minus min, and then max minus min. And then we want this value here to go to 1. So we take that whole thing and divide by max minus min. And then, this will stay 0 because 0 divided by anything is 0. We'll divide by anything besides 0. This value here will go to 1 because, the numerator and denominator are the same. So you'll get this here. Earlier, I used to put boxes around everything. In school, like you put a box around your actual answer. Yeah, and then all we need to do is multiply this by, to get this as an index, we multiply that number by 8. That'll be, well, I guess it would be 7, but, we'll clamp it to be, between 0 and 7. So that's what's happening here. If it goes over 7, we'll just clamp it to 7. So, that's to avoid like division every time that we loop over one of the triangles, or, wherever in this loop over here, we're actually just pulling this out into a variable here so that we can just do scale and we'll do that. So this bin index will be a value between 0 and 1, or 0 and 7. It'll be an integer value. And we're expanding the bin at that position, or sorry, at that index by the bounds. And the bounds is coming in as a parameter. And it's the bounds of that triangle. So this is the min, this is the max. And then, just adding, so we added a triangle to that bin and we expanded the bin by that triangle's bounds. So we just add 1 to the bin's triangle count. So that's looping over the triangles and putting them into the correct bins. And remember, this is happening per axes. Now we need to look at now we need to loop over the bins and expand the left and right box by these bins. Yeah, let me just copy the code again and we'll go over it. There's still a lot left to this function. It might be a little bit longer stream than normal. Maybe I'll go to like 2.5 hours. So let's copy this and we'll explain it again like we did before. Hold on. Make sure I copy the right thing. Okay, so where did we start? Yeah, we expanded the bins. Now we're going to keep track of the left sum. We're going to clear out the left box, and this needs to happen every time we are going to expand the box by, looping over the bins. So loop over the bins. Remember that bins is not actually the bin count because there's 7 of these lines here. And remember, this isn't necessarily just for the x-axis. It is for the y and z as well. But we're just kind of drawing it for the x case. So we loop over the bins. Remember, we're still in the top level loop here. I guess that axes loop. Loop over the bins that we've created. We'll add to the left sum the bins at I. Okay, yeah, this is where it gets a little weird. Because we're going to keep track of 2 sums, so we're going to kind of go like from the left and then from the right. Well, we're going to do the left side first. So the left sum, we just add all the triangles to the left sum, and then we're adding to that left counts at position I, which matches the bin position here, or like the bin index here. We're going to add left sum. So this is like, at this split, okay, I get it now. So at this split, we've only looked at triangles on this side of the split, right? At this split, now we're including triangles in this region as well. And then we keep adding to that left sum. The left counts here will be that kind of like sum that keeps getting accrued or whatever, right? And along the way, we're taking the left box and we're expanding it by the bin at I. The bin is a box as well, and it keeps track of the triangle count. And then we're calculating the half areas. This is used in the cost, so it's the left size. If we jump over here, it's just half of the area, so it's surface area in this case. Maybe I should say surface area. So that's kind of, going left and kind of scanning through, and I think there's a word for this, but I can't remember what it is, but it's kind of like scan over the left side and accumulating the data, putting it into these structures, and then we're going to go from the right side and do the same thing. So that's kind of what this is doing. It's kind of by the same logic and all that. And in calculating the cost, now you've got the right side and you had the left side from this loop. So we did the right side and now we can get the cost. And then we are getting the min cost. So if that's less than the min cost starts out at infinity. Then we need to update all the things that we're keeping track of. So that makes sense. This is coming from the right side. So we go like this in this case. And then do that for every axis, X, Y, and Z. And now we need to start splitting up these triangles. So we got all the information that we needed to start splitting up the triangles. So this is going to be kind of similar, actually almost like identical to the code that we had last stream. The difference being dang it, why does it do that? Yeah, where does this one end? Right there, okay. So that, yeah, so we get the cost of the thing that we're splitting. If the min cost is more than the cost of like before the split, then we don't need to split. That won't benefit us, The whole idea is that we're splitting this node up to have a lower cost. But if splitting the node up in this minimum case was more than this node cost, then there's no need to split. We'll just jump out of the function. This is one of our return conditions. Otherwise, we'll go from the left side and the right side, so we're kind of going like this. Eventually these will cross and we'll stop this while loop. But we're going to look at, I kind of explained what this is doing, but it's swapping the triangles. We want everything on the left side of the split in that array, in these arrays here, correspond with the triangles that belong on that side. And the same thing for the right side. But the way that we determine if these triangles belong on one of the two sides is that we need to look at its bin index. So we calculate its bin index, same way that we calculated it up here. Where? Right here, I believe. Yeah, right here. It's the same equation. And this is why we're keeping track of the bounds min and the bounds difference and everything. So we got a scale here. This. Oops. Dang it. Hold on. I'm gonna show how these two things are the same. So here, and then in the loop here, so this gets a centroid. We've already got the best access here, so this should return a number, x, y, or z. And then we're subtracting the bounds min, so that's this. And then we're scaling. What was scale? Bin count over the bounds diff. This is just like the best bounds diff. So everything here is like the best split that we could come up with. This is outside of, calculating all that. So now that we've calculated all that, now we can loop over the triangles and put them in the right spots. So that's the whole idea here. And then after all that, this is where we need to update left and right child nodes. We went over this on a previous stream, so I won't cover it again. But that's the whole idea. The hard part to explain is what's going on in here. But I don't know if I want to make a visualization for this. It would be a lot of work. But at a very high level, you are trying to create a split of that node that minimizes the cost. And the cost is proportional to the number of triangles inside of the split multiplied by the size of the split. So, I don't know. I don't know if I like any of this. But I mean, this is a thing that really changes. Like, the thing that you have control over is how to do the splits. And you don't want to loop over all the triangles. Like, in an O of n squared kind of way. I mean, you could if you didn't really care about the time it takes to, find the best split. Then yeah, just loop over all the centroids and split up the triangles by every single centroid and by every single, not only the centroids x, but it's y and z as well. So, like, this could maybe, I don't know. If I ever do make a visualization for this, I will definitely do it in the 2D case. And, it's pretty much the same thing. You would just use like a box 2. The 2-dimensional case goes to the 3-dimensional case, like, all by the same logic, right? Instead of x, y, now you have x, y, z. So you're just kind of looking at an additional axis. But I think in most like 2D, like spatial query kind of engines kind of stuff, I think they use quad trees instead. At least from what I've seen. I don't know why. Maybe there's a paper out there that compares, the build cost, the build time, the query time, and all this. It might be like, I know that there's a paper out there that compares a lot of these split, like, what do you call these? Oh, I'm running out of words. I could tell it's time to call the stream because I can't think of the word for anything. But different splitting methods, I guess. But let's make sure this works before I end the stream. So yeah, that works. And then here's our bounds tree. So it's very hard to see, but every box here, I believe, contains 2 triangles. Let me see if I can make this a little simpler. Let's do let's look at like a plane geometry. So here are the four, we call them the four leaf nodes, and every leaf node contains two triangles. So if you look at, let me just do like a box geometry so it has some depth. I think a box geometry is indexed. Geometry. Okay, I was expecting to see more than that. I don't know. I kind of want a geometry that's very easy to see the bounds of and see the triangles inside every box. Because the sphere geometry just has too much. What if we do like 1, 1, and then I think this defaults to, yeah, 16 right here. Let's do like 4 and 8. And these boxes, they don't have to be, you know, like cubes. They could be, you know, long or tall or whatever. So let's do like 1. What does this look like? We're definitely gonna get box overlaps. So it's very hard to see like what triangles are in which boxes. But this, I know that this is correct. Like if you do the, this is what we should see because the geometry is so symmetrical. But yeah, I guess to explain what's going on here, it would be nice to see like what was the boxes that we checked for as we intersected with this mesh. Maybe that would be something that I could, because that sounds like an interesting idea. You know, to see you started at this box, which would be that big, remember we had a big box out here. And then you went to this smaller box and you went down, 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 down until you got to, okay, now you're looking at the triangles inside the smallest box, inside the one of the leaf nodes. And inside of that, like, you know, you only had to check, let's say, like 2 triangles. You checked intersection for maybe like 6 or 7 boxes, and then just 2 triangles. Rather than checking your intersection with the big root box and then all the triangles of the mesh. So the idea is that the BVH implementation, the way that you traverse here, you should be doing a lot less triangle checks. You know, you intersected, or you checked for intersection with, I think that sphere geometry has 980 triangles. So without the BVH, you're checking 980 triangles. With the BVH, I don't know if this is the exact number, but you know, maybe you checked like 7 to 10. That's just an arbitrary number. Nodes, and then when you got down to a leaf node, you only checked 2 triangles. So this should be a lot faster than this. But I don't have any like benchmarks to really compare. But in cases where you have like 800,000 triangles, you know, maybe this difference isn't so noticeable, but something like 800,000 triangles, this should be a whole lot more efficient to use a BVH. You know, otherwise we wouldn't use them. So the things that I want to try to look at in the future are the performance difference. You know, the time it takes to do an intersection query in these two cases versus, and not versus, but that's one thing I want to look at. And then I want to look at how to visualize the nodes that you checked as you hover over the mesh here. So yeah, we'll do that. And then if I decide to keep doing this, you know, this doesn't handle any kind of scaling or rotation of the mesh. If we take a box, let's take this, to kind of show that this isn't a universal solution. If we take a box geometry, this will work, right? But if I rotate the mesh, let's say on some axis, let's go like let's pick the axis to be like the 111 axis. So we'll do new t.vector 3 111 normalize. This does not work because it's using, you know, what it, you know, it doesn't really consider the rotation that has happened. It's looking at the original geometry of the mesh. And you can rotate geometry, but you don't want to do that every frame, because that's where you're, if you rotate geometry, you need to re-upload that to the GPU. The way that the meshes, like rotation and scale and translation and all that, it's probably done as a uniform. So that will be another thing if I decide to keep doing BVH stuff. We'll take a look at how to accommodate for that, and that is talked about in the article. How to handle rotations and stuff. And it's also talked about, this is weird, they have a Looney Tunes graphic. But I think the idea there is that you keep track of the like world matrix or whatever of the mesh, and then you apply that as a, like you apply that matrix. I don't remember if it's the same matrix or the inverted matrix. You apply that to the ray itself, and then you take that transformed ray and use that instead of like the default ray that you get from the Raycaster. So wonder if my packages came. Let me see. Oh man, something's coming tomorrow. What? Why is it coming tomorrow? One of the games is coming today, it says. Yeah, but they haven't shown up yet. Okay, so I don't know if I can commit to a Thursday stream. And you know, I was thinking about like these streams, they're very instructional, but most like coding streams that you see on Twitch, they just kind of wing it, right? They just code on the fly, right? They don't do like any preparation, or like maybe they know what they're going to be doing, but they kind of figure it out in real time. And I've been thinking like maybe that should be the approach that I take. Is that I don't know how to do something. I'll just figure it out on stream, and I don't know if that would be interesting to people. But if most people are doing that style of like uh, coding streams, then maybe I should do it too. Because my idea initially with all this is that I like to upload these streams to YouTube, and then people can kind of use them as like a guide for how to do these things. And so that's why they're a lot more like instructional and feel like lessons, right? And part of the reason is because there's nobody in chat as well. Like, I don't have anybody to talk to, so it's just like pretending that I am in front of a class of people and I am the professor and I'm going over this topic. So I think I might try doing a little bit more, like a little bit less structure to the streams. I don't plan things out so much. We'll see how that goes. Maybe that's what I'll do Thursday. I'll just jump on stream and we'll just look at things. So if I do that, then I don't feel like as much pressure to have a Thursday stream, like have things prepared and stuff. So maybe that's the approach I'll take. Maybe Tuesday streams will be like lessons, and then Thursday streams will be like figuring out what we're gonna do on Tuesday. Kind of like that idea. So look out for that. I guess we'll do that moving forward. If anybody's still here, thanks for watching. I am going to go think about what's for lunch. Maybe I'll get some food like I always do. Yeah. Guess I'll end stream there. I will be back on Thursday, assuming that I don't have any car trouble or anything weird like I did last week. Let's see. Go over here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.